the weight of not having enough leaders in your church or your organization? Thank you for tuning in today. Our guest is Mac Lake. Mac is a pioneering influence in the church planting movement. He also owns a business and a nonprofit. And we're going to have a wonderful conversation here about building a leadership pipeline. Just a little background on Mac. He has been planting churches since 1997, and in 2019 founded the Multiply Group, which is an organization committed to helping leaders and churches multiply. He is also the author of 4 books, including The Multiplication Effect, which I have read. It is fantastic. I highly recommend it for every leader, no matter where you are leading. And I'm just really excited to have him here today. Mac, welcome to the Leaders Transformation.
Nicole, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Likewise. And before we dive in, of course, we do need to do a shout out to Josh Nilsson, who is the pastor of the Station Church, my home church. And he is awesome. And he's the one who actually introduced us. And it's kind of funny how you and I met even a year ago, where you were walking by, you were working out at the gym nearby, and then you were walking by the station and saw the sign and said, hey, that's Josh and Tara's church. And maybe just even like, I think you had done their assessment or something. Like, maybe tell us a little bit about that.
It was crazy. In 2010, Josh and Tara came to Atlanta and went through our church plan assessment. That passed the assessment, and I ended up training him. And so we had just started our church planting network, and he was one of the first people to go through. They were one of the first couples to go through the assessment and the training. And so I knew him, and I did all the training virtually back then. And so last year I was out there in Southern California. I was working out. I left the gym. I was driving down the street, and I see the Station Church. I went, oh my goodness, that has to be Josh's church, and stopped in and met you. You gave me a tour. And so that's where you and I met. But yeah, I trained him back in 2010 or 11 as a church planter.
Awesome. Well, then we have to thank you for allowing him to actually pastor and start a church under ARC, and it's been such a blessing. I've been going to that church since 2019, mid to late 2019 myself, and it's been absolutely amazing. And Josh is truly awesome. So yeah, what a wonderful. I love the way God works. So yeah. Well, let's talk about your start in planting churches. What inspired you to get into do that? Not just start a church, but then actually going on and planting other churches as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I'd been to Bible college. I'd been to seminary. One of the professors at Dallas Seminary approached me and said, Mac, I would love for you to take our church planting course. And I looked at him and I said, Aubrey, I will never be a senior pastor, and I will never plant a church. Well, 7 years later, I was associate pastor at a church in South Carolina, and God put on my heart to start a brand new church in Myrtle Beach, and I couldn't resist the call. So it's funny. I called him and said, hey, I need your help. And he said, too late to take my class. And so he had a book. So I read his book, and so planted a church, and it grew. And it grew pretty rapidly. And as a result, I had people coming and knocking on the door saying, hey, tell us how you did this. And so that gave me a heart to begin to train church planters. And so that's where my heart for church planting came. And then years later, had the opportunity to start a church planting network. And so designed an assessment, training, and coaching process in order to really assess and develop church planters so that we could plant healthy churches that reach people.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk about leadership development in church, but it also applies to business and in any area, like I was saying in the beginning. And, when you talk about planting churches, there's the idea of planting with a leader, obviously somebody who is going to pastor that church. At what point did you realize that there was this gap in leadership development in churches, where it's not just about being the doer, it is actually about building a network of leaders?
Yeah, for me, my journey with leadership development began in my really as a young man. I felt a call to go into ministry, was passionate about my relationship with Christ, but I was not a good leader. And people say, "Oh, Mac, don't be so hard on yourself. I'm sure it wasn't that bad." I said, "No, it was that bad," because I remember I was a youth pastor, mid-20s, and a group of parents pulled me aside and said, "Mac, we love you. You're such a nice guy. You're just not a good leader." And so I knew that I wanted to make a difference with my life. And I see this in so many people. They want to make a difference in their life, but they're not developing in their leadership skills. And it's important, if you want to influence people, it's so important to develop your leadership skills. So it was a couple years later, I was in seminary and I was attending a church, and the pastor of that church, for some reason, looked at me and said, "Hey, I want to start meeting with you every week. And I'm going to give you an article. I'm going to give you something to listen to. I want you to listen to it, read it. I want you to come into my office with questions. And I want you to ask me questions. I'm going to answer them." So every Tuesday, I'd go in his office and I would have my legal pad full of questions. And it was all about leadership. And I would ask questions and he would answer them. And I'd take notes and write down the answers. And I'm like, this is phenomenal. Nobody's ever done this with me. Everybody had always said, "You're not a good leader." And I see this in organizations. I see it at churches, nonprofits, businesses, where they look around the landscape and they go, "Yeah, nobody's ready to lead. Nobody's ready to lead." Well, of course they're not ready to lead if you're not doing development. And so what we end up doing, we end up doing leadership placement versus leadership development. We're just looking for ready-made leaders. Well, this guy started pouring into me. And after meeting with him for a few months, I would go in and sit down and I'd ask my questions. And I'd ask a question and he'd look at me and he'd go, "That's a good question. Tell me what you think." And I said, I don't know. He said, "No, give me your best answer. What do you think the answer is?" And he began to stretch my thinking. After a period of time, he changed it again. I'd ask a question. He'd go, "What do you think? You're the expert." Nicole, that blew my mind. Nobody had ever saw me that way. And so here's what happened. Leadership development is not just about developing somebody's competence. Yes, it is that, but it's also about developing their confidence. If you develop their competence without developing their competence, they will never thrive as a leader. So my role is to pour into their competency, help them learn that skill, but at the same time, begin to back away and allow them to practice more, experience more, fail more, and cheer them on and coach them so that as their competence grows, so does their confidence, because my goal is for them to lead without needing me. And many leaders don't do that. They want you, "I'll develop you enough, but I don't want you to lead without needing me." And so he taught me to lead without needing him. And it transformed my confidence and my competence.
Well, this actually brings up a really good point, because a lot of people, and especially nowadays with social media, everybody's looking at more followers. I want more followers. I want to be a thought leader. I want people to follow me. And what you're talking about is he demonstrated leadership by building leaders and, building a leader in you, right? And talk about that distinction, because I think that's where, to your point about leaders saying, "Well, I want them to need me." Like, I want you to be successful, but not more successful than me. I want you to do to be great within our organization.
Yeah.
But I don't want you to go off without me, because, I got to have some level of control because I'm the leader. And
Right.
I look at leadership as, building up people and then literally getting out of their way.
Yeah, exactly. And what we have to recognize as leaders, I can only have so many direct reports and be effective and scale a company or scale a church. Structure matters. And if I'm trying to collect a bunch of people who follow me without building a structure that can be scalable, then my organization's not going to grow and it's not going to be healthy. And so when you look at what Jesus did, and this was just fascinating when you look at this. I've studied the life of Christ chronologically. And when you look at it in 26 AD, in the fall of 26 AD, he announced his public ministry through his baptism. 1 year later, in the fall of 27 AD, Jesus began to draw in some specific followers. Now, nobody ever taught me that. In Sunday school, I was taught Jesus was baptized, he started his public ministry and grabbed 12 guys and went and changed the world. That's not how it worked. So he was baptized, announced his public ministry. A year later, he had engaged with some of these guys. He invited not 12. He invited some to follow him at that some point. And then at 9 months later, so now he's 21 months into his public ministry, Jesus goes on a mountain and he prays all night long. It's the only time we see Jesus praying all night long without ceasing. He comes down from the mountain in Luke 6, and Luke tells us he called his disciples to himself. How many people were at the base of that mountain? We don't know, but it's likely there were hundreds to thousands. And Luke says, from among them, he chose 12. So Nicole, picture this, 100 to 1,000 people at the bottom of that mountain. Jesus looks at them and says, Peter, James, Andrew, John, Matthew, Nathaniel, 11, 12, you guys come follow me. Everybody else, you're dismissed. I'm going to begin to invest the majority of my time with these 12 the next 6 months. So he selected them at that point in Luke 6. Over the next 6 months, he did intense apprenticing with them. I mean, intense. And then in Luke 9, 6 months later, he gave them authority and power. And then he began to send them out to do the work that he was doing. So prior to this, he had done 3 tours through the villages of Galilee, spreading the gospel. But now, after training them, he said, now, you guys go do this. He sent them out to do it. And then, of course, after his resurrection, he said, now, you guys, I've been training you, go make disciples of all nations. And Nicole, I got a map of this. It's a map of the known world at that time, and where all 12 of those started church planting movements that transformed the world.
Wow.
And so Jesus focused his ministry on that little nation of Israel, but developed 12 specific individuals that would go on and expand the gospel throughout the entire world. That is powerful leadership development model right there.
Well, it's interesting that, there's so much we can learn from that. When you think of, I often will say Jesus was the greatest leader of all time. He took 12 disciples in 3 years. We're still 2,000 years later. He's got billions of followers, and so what you're saying is actually it wasn't even 3 years. It was a lot, even less time, because it was structured an intentional time where he was. So it's like the sharpen the axe. If I want to cut down a tree, I want to sharpen the axe first. So when I go to actually cut down the tree, it's going to happen that much faster. Talk a little bit about that how you took that information and knowledge and your own experience and now applied it to developing a leadership pipeline where we could actually apply that in our organizations, in our churches, and our businesses.
Yeah. So I studied the life of Christ because our church was growing. When I planted our church, it was growing rapidly. And I recognized, I used to say, we got a leadership problem. We got a leadership problem. We don't have enough leaders. Then one day I realized that's not true. That's not true. We don't have a leadership problem. There are leaders there. There are people who are leading, moms who are leading in the home. There are teachers who are leading in classrooms, or principal of a school, or a coach of a team, or a business owner, or a manager at a bank. There are people who in our seats that can lead. So we don't have a leadership problem. We have a leadership development problem. What we've not done is we've not taken those people with leadership potential and said, now let's take them and let's teach them to live a biblical lifestyle of leadership. And so I read the book Leadership Pipeline by Ram Sharan years ago, and it just blew my mind. I was like, this is what I've been looking for, and it's what we teach now. Is there is a pathway that every business, every nonprofit, every church needs. It's called the Leadership Pipeline. It's a pathway. And the bottom of the pathway is the people in your organization who lead themselves. They need to learn to lead themselves before anything else. Once they know how to lead themselves, they flow up to the next level and they lead others. Now, there are certain competencies that you have to have in order to lead a team or lead a group. It's from that group of people, some of those are going to flow up to the next level of the pipeline where they're going to lead leaders. Now, these individuals, again, leading a team is very different than leading leaders. So your competencies, once again, they change when you go to that level. The next level, they flow up to lead a department or a section of the company. And then the last level of the leadership pipeline is they lead the organization. So that is the senior leader or the executive team. And so there are 5, generally in most organizations, some are bigger, but most organizations have 5 levels of a leadership pipeline. And you have to identify the competencies at each level so that as you move people up, they can develop the competencies to lead at that level. You and I were talking about this before the interview started, how we've seen people who were really good. Let's take a church example. You've got somebody that stands at the door and they're a really good greeter. And you go, oh, we need to make them a greeting leader. So you make them a greeting leader where they can lead the whole, all the other greeters, the 5 or 10 other greeters. You show up the next Sunday, what are they doing? They're still standing at the door greeting people. They're not leading that team. They keep doing the same behaviors they were at the lead themselves level. And so we have to equip them to change their mentality and their competencies so they know how to lead at that level. But most organizations, businesses and churches alike, they go, oh, look, there's somebody that's doing a good job. Let's move them up to another level of leadership. And they don't teach them the competencies or help change their mindset to actually lead at that level. That's a big mistake. Now, the other mistake is skipping levels of the pipeline, taking somebody that's a good team member and let's say a church. You got somebody that's a good volunteer in student ministry and you hire them as your student director. You skip 2 whole levels of the pipeline. That's going to be a disaster every time.
Yeah. And this happens in business all the time. It happens in churches all the time. I've seen it also in business where, somebody gets hired and they are promoted because of longevity time, or, maybe they're really good at what they do. Or like I said, sometimes it's just like, well, they've been here long enough,
Yeah.
and so they know the culture and all of that. And just because they know the culture doesn't mean that they're going to be a great manager or leader at a higher level. I want to talk about, there's 5 levels. There's different competencies, like you said, at each of those levels. I'd love to talk about the difference between leading others and leading leaders. What is the difference in competence that's needed there?
Yeah.
And confidence, actually, because you talk about confidence as well.
Yeah. With when you're leading a team of people, you've got to know how to build, you got to understand teamwork and team building. You have to understand that concept. To where you can really unify people and mobilize them towards a specific mission or goal. And so it's not just operating in silos as a team, but actually uniting together, capitalizing on each other's strengths, understanding each other's personalities so that you're leveraging strengths and personalities. And as a leader, helping each other understand our personalities helps us remain unified and reduce tension and conflict that so many teams can have at times. But it's mobilizing a team of people. Now, when you move somebody up to a leader of leaders, now they're overseeing 3 to 5 leaders. Now, this individual has to learn to ask good questions because they want that leader to continue to develop their confidence. So you want them asking questions. We don't have time to go into this, but for those that lead leaders in our organization, we teach them something called adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership is you adapt your leadership style to their particular competency levels and their needs. And so it's that type of thing that a leader of leaders has to learn to do. Is my role is to make that leader gain confidence and competence and credibility with their team. My role is to help them evaluate their own leadership, evaluate their culture, so that they're constantly, I'm really serving as a coach at that leader of leaders level. I'm coaching those leaders to maximize their potential.
So first of all, there's a couple of questions that come up as it relates to this. What I notice, and when you're talking about 3 to 5 leaders, right? When the leader leading leaders, 3 to 5, versus when they're having a team, they might have 10, 12, 20 people. And
Yep.
so it's interesting that there's this misconception that as you are a more successful leader, that you're going to lead many more people. And I think that's where there's and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's this challenge of a leader thinking that they have to kind of like open their arms to more and more, when actually it's the opposite, where there's the smaller, more tighter knit, which is the one to many, where they're investing and pouring in, like Jesus, pouring in not hundreds and thousands, is pouring into 12 who are now pouring into those other people. So talk a little bit about how you've seen that as an example and working with people, how that they need to make that shift in their mindset about what their role really is.
Yeah. It's when you move up to that leader of leaders level, you're increasing your influence. You're not increasing your number of direct individuals that you're leading. And so if I had a coach, somebody at that lead leaders level, let's just call it a coach. If I had somebody at that lead leaders level that was leading 3 different leaders, and each of those leaders had 10 people on their team, now their scope of influence is now 33 people, but their direct report is 3 people. And right. And as you, there are different ratios at the different levels, but it's what Jesus did. Jesus chose 21 months into his public ministry. He chose, I'm going to spend time with this disproportionate few in order to impact the many. And so now what I see so many leaders doing, they make this mistake. They think, oh, I got to give everybody equal time. I got to treat everybody the same. No, you don't. If Jesus didn't, I don't have to. I want to love everybody equally, but I'm not going to give everybody equal access. And so when I planted our church, before we went public, I chose 7 leaders that I was going to lead through. All 7 oversaw a different department. And this was ever before we launched our first public service. And we had grown to about 70 people and a little core team of people pre-launch. And I told all 70 of those people, listen, these 7 people are who I'm going to spend my time with. I love you all. But if this church is going to grow and accomplish the mission that God's given us, I've got to use my leadership gift to invest in these 7, and these 7 are going to invest in you guys. And nobody questioned it. I said it, they accepted it. Like, yeah, that makes sense. And most leaders don't define that for people. So they leave it vague because they want everybody to feel like, oh, well, hey, I'm accessible to the key leader. And you've got to delineate that for people so that you give them the right expectations. Because if you don't give them the right expectations, they're going to end up with frustrations about, I wonder why he's spending time with them and not me, because they don't see the difference. And so when you're at that level, you just got to bring some clarity. And that's what the leadership pipeline does. It brings clarity of who's at what level and what their responsibility and relationships look like at that level.
I think of the story with Moses and his Jethro, his father-in-law, who said, this is not good for you to do all this. And I think that there's so many leaders that start to get worn down because they're trying to be everything to everyone. They're getting more and more stretched, and everybody's thinking, well, they need to be accessible because we want to have this small town community feel. And I think of what Richard Branson said once, in one of his books. He was talking about the principle that they use at Virgin, which is growing bigger and smaller. And they do that in churches as well, right? This idea of bigger and smaller at the same time. You can grow bigger and maintain that when you have those the structures in place to develop leaders, and everybody gets supported, not necessarily by one person or by a very few, but ultimately dispersed out.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, because I'll give you a church example and then a business example. In churches, a lot of times pastors feel that Moses pressure. Yeah. And Too many people drawing off of them, reporting to them. They feel the Moses pressure. And when you begin to talk to them about structure, they push back on it because, well, that's not spiritual. Well, I go, wait a minute. When God sent Jethro to Moses, and Jethro looked at him and said, Moses, you are stressed out. You're overworking yourself. You're wearing yourself. You can't keep the stress level you're under is too high. He did not look at Moses and say, Moses, the solution is to pray more. The solution is to read your Bible more. That's not what he said. He said the spiritual solution to your problem is putting a structure in place. Now, on the business side, I'll apply it this way, because business side gets structure, right? Yeah, I need to put a structure in place. And so they get that part. But let me show you the wisdom behind this. All right, this is funny. One of my hobbies is fitness and nutrition. And so I want to connect two verses with you. Okay. Exodus 18, Jethro said, Moses, you're stressed out. You're killing yourself. Your anxiety is high. Put a structure together. And Moses did it. Now, Deuteronomy, 40 years later, Deuteronomy 34 says, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not weak and his strength was not gone. Now, here's my theory. If Moses had looked at Jethro and said, I'm not going to do that, Jethro, and he would have continued the way he was going and did not put a structure in place, here's what I think Deuteronomy 34:8 would say. Moses was 120 years old when he died because God's in control of our lifespan, but he had weak knees, high blood pressure, and heart disease. Because he would have lived under that pressure. So structure is actually something that can help our spiritual health, our emotional health, and our physical health. It helps alleviate the stress that can age us so quickly and begin to eat away at our health span. Again, God's in control of our lifespan, but we're in control of our health span. What I eat, how much I move, how well I sleep, all of that influences my health span. My mom is 90 years old. I celebrate that. Unfortunately, for the past 12 years, mom has Alzheimer's. I can go visit her today, knock on her door, spend an hour with her, walk out the door, turn around, knock on the door. She'll answer the door and go, well, Mac, what are you doing here? Her health span ended 12 years ago. And part of my mission is not only help organizations build healthy structures to multiply, but to build healthy disciplines in your life so that you can extend the health span of your life. Because when you expand your health span, you expand your influence of your life.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And health span. I'm going to use that. I'll quote you for the first few, and then it'll be mine. I'll steal it. But no, that is well. And you think about from a leadership quality of leadership, and even like as a pastor, being able to maximize our potential. I'm very passionate about maximizing our potential to be able to do that and to be everything that God called us to be. We need that health span. We need that we can't do it when we're stressed, and God doesn't. There's nowhere in the Bible that, God speaks about wearing yourself out and being stretched so thin. Yes, in our weakness, he is strong, but that's not the weakness he's talking about.
God asks us to make sacrifices, but you never see him ask us to sacrifice our family or our health. Never. Not one time. And so we sacrifice the wrong things on the altar of ministry sometimes that God has never asked us to sacrifice. Or you're sacrificing on the altar of your business. You're sacrificing your health on the altar of your business. You're sacrificing your family on the altar of business. And God doesn't want you to do that. And my wife and I, our mantra is we want to die young at an old age, because just like Moses, when Moses was 120 years old when he died, God did not retire him because he was worn out. He retired him because his purpose was fulfilled and complete. And I want to live with full vitality to the day I take my last breath. And man, I think that needs to be all of our goal. But if you're letting your business stress you out, you're shortening your health span.
Amen. Oh, I love that. I love that. Speaking of which, I want to talk about how do you build this leadership pipeline, this structure in the midst of a busy schedule, in the midst of trying to get a whole lot of things done. You're not necessarily able to step out, take 6 months and do it. You're in it. So
Right.
how do you help churches, businesses to do that?
Yeah, when I help churches or organizations do this, I make them go. I make the entire team go through the process. The entire team needs
Define
to.
the team. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's their staff.
Okay.
And so if I'm working with a church that has 12 staff, all 12 staff have to go through it. If it's a church with 3 staff, all 3 staff have to go through it. If it's a company, then their entire staff needs to go through it. And then with churches, I even invite some of your key volunteers into the process so they understand it.
Or ministry leaders, that type, would that count?
Some of their ministry leaders. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And then I tell them, second, you got to make it a priority. I've got a church I'm talking to right now, really, really big church. And on the call there, but yes, we need this. Yes, we want it. We're in. I said, wait a minute. I said, before you say yes, I want you to recognize I'm going to spend a year with you to help you build this, but it has to be the number one priority on your plate. They went, oh, okay, we need to think about it. So they took a month and thought about it. They came back and they said, can we make it the number 2 priority? I said, no, you can't. And it's got to be a top priority for you guys. And so it's fun. So it does have to be a priority. Now, here's the other thing I would say. Here's what people miss. Leadership development is not something you add to your schedule. It's something you integrate into your schedule. Now, building out the leadership pipeline is going to take extra time. There's going to be a sacrifice of time. But here's what I say. All right, you have to choose your pain. Do I want to choose the pain of living with the existing problems I have, or do I want to choose the pain of making some sacrifice right now to get this thing built out over the next 6 to 8 months and get it up and running and get rid of that pain? You get to choose the pain. We're always in a position where we get to choose our pain. And a lot of people, I find out, they're just paralyzed. And so they end up choosing the pain they have because they're scared to make a decision to move into this. But again, once you build this thing out, I tell people all the time, leadership development is something you integrate into your schedule, not something you add to your schedule. And there, in business, nonprofit, churches, there are golden opportunities of leadership development. They're just laying around the floor every single day, And so if I'm leading a meeting, who did I bring into the meeting that I want to teach how to lead meetings? Or who in my existing team am I saying, hey, I want you to learn lead meetings, so I want you to lead this portion and this portion, and can continually give them reps of leading meetings. Pastors, oh my goodness, worship leaders, every Sunday you're speaking or you're leading worship. My question is, who is sitting on the front row watching you, and you're going to meet with them 5 minutes afterwards to debrief and say, what did you see me do well? What would you have done different? What did you learn today? And what questions do you have? 4 questions that anybody can use to debrief an experience. It doesn't take long, but who's on the front row watching you? Who's shadowing you as you're walking around the hallways at work, who's following you on a sales call? Who's sitting in the room when you're on a phone doing a hard, very difficult confrontation? If you know you got something like that getting ready to happen, go find a young leader, bring him in a room, tell him to sit down. Hey, I'm getting ready to make a really tough phone call. I want you to sit over there and I want you to listen to it. And afterwards, we're going to talk about what you thought I did well. What would you have done different? What did you learn today? And what questions do you have? And you can do that every single day, every single week, if you want to.
That's brilliant. And that's so intentional. Like you talk about, it's the intentionality of integrating that. I love it. And that actually leads to something I wanted to kind of highlight, because I know when we talk about leadership development, a lot of times there's an assumption that it's going to be in a classroom. And I know that you're very big on not doing in classroom, like, okay, so we'll have you come in once a month and we're going to go through this curriculum and we're going to teach people how to be leaders. And
Right.
I don't know where this lecture style of teaching, I mean, I guess in the school system, we learn it, but it's
Yeah.
not the most effective. And so talk a little bit about how your training in leadership development, better yet, is different than that.
Yeah, yeah. So I teach something called the Triad of development. If you really want to see transformation happen, then you need to give people knowledge. That's the first part. You give them something to read, listen to, or teach them something. Experience. Now they have to put that competency into practice. And the third element is coaching. So knowledge, experience, coaching. When you overlap those three things, transformation happens. Now it's funny when I'm on site and I'm working with an organization, I might be standing in front of 30 people, and I look at them and I say, hey, I love you guys. I'm glad I'm here with you, but this is not my preferred mode of development. And let me tell you why. I've been standing up here talking to you for 45 minutes. Now, let me tell you something. I cannot tell you, number one, the level of comprehension that any of you had. I have no idea if you're paying attention or not. I cannot tell you if your competency level changed. But now let me show you something. So then I'll take three people, I put three people around the table, I make everybody else watch, and for 1 hour, I sit with those three people and I train them. And at the end, I turn around to the other people they're watching. I said, tell me what you saw. And they went, oh my gosh. The level of engagement, it just felt like you were sitting having coffee with them, but everybody was learning and everybody was growing. And the questions you ask them, what you were drawing out of them and what you were putting in, it was amazing. You know, and they love watching it. And I said, now let me tell you something. I can tell you all three of those people were dialed in and comprehending what I was saying. If they didn't, they were asking me questions, right? And secondly, I can tell you that all three competencies level changed. I sit here and watched it change. I saw light bulbs coming on. I saw them writing down commitments of things they were going to do and things they were going to change in the way they led. I said, that's why my preferred methodology of developing leaders is 1-on-3. Give me a triad all day long. And that's what I do. I mean, I met with my guys yesterday, and I got three guys. We're learning leadership stuff together, and I'm literally watching these guys transform in front of my eyes. And you do that over a period of weeks and months, you begin to see transformation happen. That's why I prefer that. Dumping information doesn't produce transformation. And the American mindset is, well, if I said it, they got it, they should be able to do it. And it's just not the way it works.
Oh, that's so good. That is so good. Mac, you were like, I could listen to you all day talking about this because it's masterful. It really is. And you can tell that you apply it, you live it, you've integrated it into everything you do. And so absolutely love it. Thank you so much. And there's so many more questions. I'm just going to say to encourage everybody that go get a copy of your book. I know you have other books as well. This is the one that I read, The Multiplication Effect, and I highly recommend that. And then of course you have those other ones that even in the back shelf for those that are watching, that are your books as well. And so, just thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. And any final thoughts before we wrap up and maybe even let them know where they can find you?
Yeah, sure thing. Multiplygroup.org is our website. MACLAKE, MacLake24 is my Instagram. And if you're like, hey, I want to jump in and do something, I want to start developing leaders today, what do I do? Then I would say get a copy of my book, Leading Others. That's the first level. That's the leader level of the leadership pipeline. Just grab that book. It's got 8 different competencies. It's designed to be led in a cohort or triad type of environment. A lot of questions, short reading, and just find you 3 people in your company or in your church. Find 3 people, say, hey, let's go through 5 or 6 of these. There's 8 of them in there, but let's go through 5 of these competencies together, and I'll start developing you or discipling you in leadership. And it's easy as that. That's why we created that series. It's a plug and play. You can take it and start developing leaders today. So if somebody really wants to dive in, go to multiplygroup.org. And Nicole, for your audience, if they use capital FOM, capital all cap FOM 10, Friends of Mac 10, they get a 10% discount on any of our resources.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm going to check that out as well. Those additional books. Thank you, Max, so much. I appreciate you. You are awesome. And I just love what you're up to. And I'm going to be re-listening to this and of course, sharing this like crazy, but also re-listening to it. And I'm going to be borrowing some of those things that you were talking about, the health span for sure. You were speaking to me on that as well. So thank you again. And thank you to our listeners for being here and those of you that are watching online. I hope you enjoyed this. There is so much that Mac has shared in this conversation. So I would encourage you to go back, re-listen to it, make notes. If you were driving and not able to do it, go back and listen and make notes. Share this with someone else. If you know a leader out there or someone who has been, whether it's a small entrepreneur starting out in their business or someone that is leading a large organization that is stressed, that is working long hours, trying to grow and not knowing how to do it. Maybe they've said, I don't have enough leaders. My managers are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then I encourage you to share this with them so that they can start on the path of creating leaders and developing leaders in their organization and to be able to increase their influence and their impact that they can have. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, send us a note, let us know how this has impacted you. Of course, you can find us on social as well. And I look forward to also seeing you next week on another episode of the Leaders of Transformation. Have a great day.